the procrastination. Chapter 1. The Dust on the Sword.
The sun was high over the city of Corinth, but the heavy drapes in Davus's chambers were kept tightly drawn, blocking out the vibrant light of the morning. The room was silent, save for the slow, heavy breathing of a man asleep at noon, surrounded by a mountain of unfinished business. Davus lay on his couch, his eyes half open, staring blankly at the ceiling. He was 35 winters old, born with a brilliant, razor-sharp mind that could dissect complex philosophical arguments in seconds. He was meant to be the chief magistrate of his district, a leader responsible for reforming the city's corrupted legal codes. On his cedar desk lay the half-written pages of the new laws, covered in a fine layer of grey dust. Next to the desk stood a bronze breastplate, its leather straps dry and cracking from months of absolute neglect. "I will sharpen the quill tomorrow," Davus muttered to the empty room, turning his back to the light. "The city council doesn't meet until the end of the season. The laws can wait. I am too tired today. The alignment of my thoughts isn't perfect yet. I need to rest my mind so that when I finally sit down, the work will be flawless." He was a master of his own deceptions. He wasn't avoiding the work because he was stupid or lazy. In his own eyes, he was waiting for an illusion called the perfect moment. He was letting his days bleed into one another, turning his life into a long, comfortable waiting room, completely blind to the fact that while he delayed his duty, his character was rotting from the inside out. From the shaded corner of the room, near the large water basin, stood Secundus. He was an old master carpenter who had spent 40 winters building the great warships of the Corinthian fleet. His arms were corded with muscle from decades of wielding the iron axe, and his face was lined by the sun. He had been quietly watching Davus hit the soft cushions of his couch for 3 days. "The wood does not cure itself by lying in the shade, Davus," Secundus said, his voice deep, slow, and unshakable. "You have been staring at that ceiling since the 3rd hour of the morning. You call it resting your mind, but I see a helpless target who is actively burying his own talent in a grave of comfort." Davus sat up, his silk robe sliding off his shoulder, his face flushing with a sudden, defensive irritation. "You don't understand the nature of intellectual labor, carpenter. Writing a legal code requires inspiration, not just manual pounding. I am waiting for the right state of mind. To rush into duty without the proper internal fire is the act of a fool." Secundus walked over to the cedar desk and picked up the dusty bronze breastplate, running his rough thumb over the tarnished metal. "The fire does not arrive before the wood is split, magistrate," the old builder murmured, setting the heavy armor down with a sharp, echoing thud. "You believe you are delaying the work, but you are actually delaying your life. You are acting as if you have a contract with fate that guarantees you 1,000 tomorrows, while the only real hour you have is dying right now under your cushions."
Chapter 2. The Executioner of Time.
Davus stood up from the couch, his boots sliding across the smooth marble floor. "I am not destroying my life. I am merely pacing myself. The work will get done. I just need a few more days of stillness." "Stillness is the luxury of the dead, Davus," Secundus replied, walking slowly toward the open balcony, ripping back the heavy drapes to let a blinding shaft of golden sunlight flood the chamber. Below them, the harbor of Corinth was a hive of intense, disciplined movement, ships docking, hammers ringing, and laborers carrying heavy timber. "Come out to the light. Let us look at the monster you are feeding every time you say tomorrow." Davus walked to the railing, shielding his eyes from the glare. "Tell me, Davus," Secundus said, pointing down at a young apprentice struggling to carry a heavy sack of copper nails up the steep gangplank of a galley. "When a soldier is ordered to march through a muddy swamp in the freezing rain, what is the heavy thing he carries? Is it his iron shield? Is it his pack?" Davus sighed, his mind still heavy with the lethargy of his long sleep. "It is his equipment, obviously." "No," Secundus said, his eyes locking onto Davus's defensive gaze with a clinical clarity. "The heaviest thing he carries is his own hesitation. The soldier who stands at the edge of the mud, looking at the rain, complaining about the cold, and wishing for a sunny day, carries a mountain of misery in his mind. But the moment he drops his foot into the mud, the moment he accepts the reality of the march, the weight disappears. The mud is just mud. The work is just work. Your anxiety about the laws is 10 times heavier than the actual writing of the text. You are letting the phantom of the task terrorize your peace because you refuse to take up the pen today. Secundus stepped closer, his voice dropping into that deep, heavy rhythm of the inner citadel. The Stoic sages taught us that procrastination is not a failure of time management, it is a failure of courage. You are terrified of failing, you are terrified of the discomfort of focus, and so you choose the slow suicide of delay. Do not act as if you had 10,000 years to throw away. Death stands at your elbow. Be good for something while you live, and it is in your power. Every time you postpone a duty, you are murdering the man you were meant to become today.
Chapter 3: The Anatomy of the Momentum.
Secundus picked up a plain wooden block from his pocket and placed it on the flat marble railing of the balcony. He pushed it gently with his finger, making it slide a few inches before it stopped. The human mind is exactly like this timber, Davus, Secundus said, tapping the wood. When it sits still in the shade for too long, it develops a heavy friction. It becomes stuck to the stone. The longer you lie on that couch, the harder it becomes to lift your arm. You believe that tomorrow you will magically possess more energy, more clarity, and more drive. But that is a biological lie. Tomorrow you will simply be a man who has practiced being lazy for 24 more hours. You will be weaker, not stronger. He pushed the block again, harder this time, letting it glide smoothly along the entire length of the railing. The secret of the inner citadel is momentum, the old carpenter whispered. The wise man does not wait for inspiration to begin the work. He begins the work to find the inspiration. He does not ask his body if it feels like doing its duty. He treats his animal urges, the desire for sleep, the craving for comfort, as external noise. He locks the gate against them, he takes up the tool, and he forces the first line onto the paper. Within 10 minutes, the friction melts. The mind heats up. The work becomes its own fuel. Secundus leaned over the railing, his face a mask of absolute structure. Every morning when you open your eyes, apply the clinical knife of reason. Do not ask, "What do I want to do today?" Ask, "What is the duty that nature has demanded of me in this hour?" If it is to write the law, sit at the desk. If it is to clean the armor, take up the cloth. Do not negotiate with your own weakness. A man who allows his lower urges to dictate his actions is not a free citizen. He is a prisoner who is bowing to his own shadows.
Chapter 4. The Trial of the Gavel.
4 weeks later, the illusion of the endless tomorrow was shattered by a sudden, violent political crisis. The old chief magistrate suffered a fatal stroke in the middle of the night, leaving the city's legal courts in a state of immediate, chaotic paralysis. A massive dispute had broken out between the powerful merchant guilds and the harbor laborers over the grain distribution, a conflict that threatened to erupt into a bloody riot in the public squares by morning. At dawn, a frantic herald from the Senate burst into Davus's chamber, his face pale with panic. "The council is assembling in 1 hour, Magistrate Davus. The factions are already arming themselves near the temple. The emperor's legate has demanded to see the new legal codes immediately to settle the dispute. If the laws are not presented before the sun clears the horizon, the city will be placed under military rule, and your name will be stripped from the registry for treason." The herald's words acted like a sudden wave of ice water over Davus's spirit. The crisis was real, the clock was ticking, and his desk was still covered in the dust of his hesitation. For a split second, the old animal panic, the frantic desire to run, to make an excuse, to blame the lack of time stormed his mind. His heart began to hammer against his ribs, his hand trembling as he looked at the unfinished parchment. He wanted to scream at fate for the injustice of the sudden deadline. But Davus looked across the room and saw Secundus standing near the water basin. The old carpenter was looking at him with an unblinking, glacial stillness, his arms crossed over his chest. Davus closed his eyes and took a deep, steady breath of the morning air. He forced his mind to step back from the edge of the future. He didn't ask, "Why is this happening to me again?" he asked. "What is the factual reality in front of my boots right now?" The red fog of hesitation evaporated, leaving a cold, razor-sharp, and mathematical focus. "Leave the lamp," Davus ordered the herald, his voice cutting through the panic with an iron, unshakable clarity. "And tell the Senate that the code will arrive on the hour. Not a second before, not a second after. Now, clear the room."
Chapter 5. The Forged Line.
55 minutes, Davus did not look up from the cedar desk. The quill moved across the dry paper with a ferocious, rhythmic speed, scratch, 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 sounding like an iron sword being sharpened on a grindstone. His hand didn't shake, his eyes didn't wander, and his mind refused to acknowledge a single thought of failure or fatigue. Every time his body wanted to lock up, every time the old voice of procrastination tried to whisper, "It is too late, you cannot finish it," he ruthlessly dropped the opinion and focused entirely on the next word, the next letter, the next ink stroke. He was the furnace. The pressure of the deadline wasn't choking him. It was the very fuel that was melting his resistance, turning his raw talent into an unbreakable wall of structure. When the heavy bronze bells of the city began to ring, marking the first hour of the morning, Davus wrote the final line, pressed his official wax seal onto the warm red clay, and stood up from his desk. His robes were stained with ink, his shoulders were sore, but his eyes carried a new, mature dignity that had nothing to do with the polished arrogance of his past. He marched down to the grand assembly hall himself, throwing the heavy, leather-bound code onto the center of the Senate table right in front of the Emperor's legate. The text was clear, the logic was flawless, and the structural solutions were so absolute that both the guilds and the laborers were forced to accept the terms without a single drop of blood being shed. The city was saved from military occupation in an hour. As the shouting in the Senate hall faded into a respectful silence, Davus walked back out onto the high terrace, looking at the bright, open sea below. Secundus was standing there, his heavy iron axe resting against the stone pillar. He looked at the young magistrate's dirty hands and his steady, unhurried posture. "The laws are delivered, Secundus," Davus said quietly, his voice deep and completely free of that old, restless anxiety. "Yes," Secundus smiled faintly, a deep glint of pride in his weathered eyes. "And tell me, magistrate, did you require a special internal fire to write them this morning?" "No," Davus replied, looking at his own steady palms, which were no longer hiding from the light. "The fire wasn't waiting for me in the room, teacher. I had to create it by striking the iron myself. I spent months thinking that the work was my enemy, but today I realized that the delay was the only grave I had. I am finally awake, and I have never felt more powerful. Because you finally mastered the first second of your duty," Secundus said, his voice deep and full of an unshakable pride. "When you stop waiting for the perfect moment and start forcing your will onto the present hour, the world loses its power to paralyze you. You are no longer a drifting leaf in the wind, you are the stone that breaks the current. Assemble your life action by action, and be content if each one achieves its purpose as far as it can. No one can prevent that." Davus took a deep, clean breath of the sea wind, turned away from the balcony, and walked firmly back to his study, ready to meet the next duty with an unbreakable soul and an unshakable mind. Most of us spend our lives trapped in the prison of procrastination and delaying habits. We sit on our couches waiting for an illusion called inspiration, hiding from the discomfort of focus, and promising ourselves that we will begin our projects or our lives tomorrow. We have turned our minds into a massive graveyard of unfulfilled potential, acting as if we had an eternity of time to throw away. But a Stoic knows that tomorrow is a ghost that has ruined more lives than any war. The next time you find yourself delaying a duty, making an excuse to avoid focus, or waiting for the perfect state of mind, stop. Do not catch the spear of chaos with your bare hands. Remember the dusty breastplate of Corinth. Take a deep breath, sit at your desk, take up the tool, and force your hand to move for just 10 minutes. Clear the noise, drop the negotiations with your own weakness, and spend your limited energy only on the action of the present second. Do not wait for the fire. Become the match. This is Neo-Aurelium, transmission on the ultimate victory over procrastination. Stay unshakable. Take care of yourself